Hi, welcome to Discover Shakespeare Month 11. And this month we're going to finish out Henry VI, part 1.5 to 3. So, really, parts 2 and 3. And we're going to finish this out. I just want to say off the top, I had a really hard time with this one. I just had trouble finishing it. And then when I did, I had to immediately go back and watch it again just to get it. And it's not that it's so difficult, but it's just, for me, hard to keep track of all the different people switching sides on the different sides of the War of the Roses. For this play, I feel like it may be simpler to view a stage version than a film version. And for this one, again, I watched and am recommending the BBC Hollow Crown Season 2 version of the Wars of the Roses, which covers Henry VI Part 1 and 2, which is all three of the plays squashed into 2 episodes, and then they go on to Richard III, which we will do at some point in the future, but we're being set up for that here. So anyway, I apologize for the late video. But I think I know who everybody is now, which is a major accomplishment in one of these plays. And I have a few things that kind of stuck out to me, a few themes and portions of this play that really jumped out at me. But first, I will go through the plot because that was a lot of work for me to keep it straight, especially because people have their title and their given name, and then they're switching sides, and there's multiple people with the same name, so it's just, it's a lot to keep track of. So, when we leave, we're following the way the Hollow Crown splits this up. So when we leave, York, Richard Plantagenet, is raising an army against the king. As this opens, 5 years have passed. We see a battle, I believe it's the Battle of St. Albans. Somerset, our little philandering favorite of the queen, is killed in battle. And York is victorious and marches to the palace to claim the crown. So after we have this, battle, he comes to claim the crown, and this part I found really affecting because it's him and Henry arguing over who is the rightful king, and I can really see how that would be hard to justify because Henry is, of course, Henry V's son, and then Henry V is Henry IV's son, and Henry IV, as we know from our Henriad plays, Henry Bolingbroke overthrew Richard II. And so there's an argument there, well, Richard gave up the crown to him, or no, Richard was forced to give up the crown to Henry Bolingbroke. So who has the legitimate claim to the throne? So I can see why people have been fighting over this for forever. Because, you can make an argument for more than one rightful king, depending on, which bloodline you're following and who, wasn't usurped and all this stuff. So anyway, they argue about that, which I find really interesting. And then Henry comes up with this idea. He says, well, let me reign, let me still be the king, and I'll name you my heir, so, when I die, you can have the throne, and then your line will inherit the crown. Completely disinheriting his own son, which is not the smartest idea, I wouldn't think. But York agrees to this. Then, of course, when Queen Margaret hears about this, she's outraged. why even just to do that to your son? I mean, there's so much agony and wars and intrigue throughout history of who the successor of a kingdom is. And of course, during Shakespeare's time, this was a really big deal because Elizabeth had no successor. She refused to get married, or she had no known legitimate successor. She refused to marry, and it was a huge, and then she was arguing with Mary, Queen of Scots. They were kind of going back and forth about the succession of England's throne. So this was a big deal in Shakespeare's time also, because as we see from this play, when you don't have a clear line of succession, you can just be embroiled in war forever. And that's so destabilizing and horrifying for a country to go through. So anyway, Henry just gives up his lines right to the throne. Margaret is completely enraged, so she takes some men or an army to York's Richard Plantagenet, to his house, and kind of wreaks havoc there. They kill one of his younger sons. She kills him. Some of his sons survive, the three older ones, Edward, George, and Richard, who we know will be Richard III. So, spoiler alert. They survive. I think they take their mother away to safety, so when all that carnage is happening, they're not there. Then they come back, see that their father is dead, their house is destroyed, and they, of course, vow revenge on that. So, with that revenge in mind, there's another battle where the Yorks, the father, he's dead now, so it's the three sons. They are successful. So Henry is imprisoned in the Tower, and Margaret and her son Edward, or Ned as he's known in this, they flee to France, which leaves the three Plantagenet York sons, and Edward is crowned King Edward IV. So Henry VI is done for now. Then we have a time jump. 10 years pass. Within this time jump, Warwick, who is with York, the now king, Warwick goes to France to get a wife for King Edward, because through this whole play we're seeing all these screw-ups that are done with France. Henry lost all this French territory that Henry V heroically gained, and then Henry made an unwise marriage with Margaret with no dowry and ceding back all of France's territory, which was not good politically. So that was dumb. And so now Warwick is going to France to get a French noble wife for the king, strengthen those allies with France. Meanwhile, Edward just marries some English noblewoman, some widow, because he likes her. So that's not smart either. So Warwick gets to France, where Queen Margaret is being sheltered by the royals. And when he gets there, they all get letters that say that Edward has married some random woman, which enrages Warwick, enrages the French king. And so Warwick switches loyalties back to Queen Margaret and the deposed King Henry. And then the French King Louis offers aid for their military cause. So here's some side switching starting. Okay, then we have Edward's brother George, who George and Richard do not like Elizabeth. I forget her, Woodville, I think is her name. They don't like the new queen, Edward's choice. George doesn't find favor with his brother, so he switches sides to Warwick, who has switched sides back to Margaret and Henry. So people are leaving this King Edward faction and going back to the Henry faction. So George switches sides. Now we're going to have another battle. And right before the battle, George switches back to his brother. So there's a lot of kind of double agent stuff going on here. It's a change of conscience for him, I believe. And meanwhile, we have Richard showing signs of ambition and cruelty throughout this play, which are going to be picked up in Richard III. And I, just to tell you right now, I'm not yet familiar with that play. I mean, everyone knows my horse, the kingdom, a horse, my kingdom for a horse. But I've never read that play, so I just, have glimmerings of how famous and important that play is and what a great villain Richard III is. But we're seeing traces of his cruelty in this. In, I think it's the second big battle of this play, we see, pardon me, we see, at least in the Hollow Crown version, him just let someone die instead of mercifully killing them swiftly. He just leaves them to die slowly and painfully. And then we also see Henry being begged to kill, I don't think it's, maybe it's Clifford, I'm sorry, I don't remember at the moment, but Henry is, so Richard, out of cruelty, refuses to mercy kill this guy. And then Henry comes upon him and is unable to provide that mercy to him. So it's a really interesting contrast there, where Richard does the same thing out of cruelty that Henry does out of kind of weakness and cowardice. So I think that's a really interesting little contrast there, because Henry is just so weak and so, I don't want to say dumb, but yeah, just weak. And when, actually, sorry to drop the plot, but when Henry is like, yeah, whatever, you can have the crown after I'm gone, that's fine, his allies call him, you faint-hearted and degenerate king, in whose cold blood no spark of honor bides. And that's a real cut to him. So his character is just, it's just not that masculine, decisive power that is kind of the masculine ideal that is embodied by a righteous king. So anyway, we're in okay, so in the final battle, we've seen trickles of Richard's ambition and of his cruelty throughout this play. So he kills Henry's son, Ned, Edward. He kills him. Margaret is taken prisoner. She's defeated in this battle. And then Richard goes to the Tower of London and kills Henry in the tower. So now it seems like everything has come to a nice little conclusion. We still have Edward IV on the throne with his wife that nobody likes, and they have a son. I think it's another Edward, and everything seems fine except his uncle is Richard III. So we're going to pick up some more turmoil in that play when we get to that. I wanted to go back and talk about just one little line that stuck out to me when Henry is kind of trying to make a case for himself being the king, as he's, saying, what of France? And his rivals say, talk not of France since thou hast lost it all. And that's really what he did in the first part of Henry VI, is just squandered everything his heroic father gained just so easily. And then he kind of bumbled into this War of the Roses by not taking, pardon me, the grievances of Lancaster and York, of not taking them seriously. He just kind of brushed it off and let that fester. And that's what happened to the Civil War. Now, him giving up the crown and saying, just let me rule till I die and then you can have the crown, was his attempt to stop the Civil War. But, I mean, that's not a smart move. And, of course, that's not going to stick. The Yorks have a discussion about the right to the crown, and that if you have a right to the crown, it doesn't matter if it's because he bequeaths it to you. You have a claim that's legitimate, no matter if this king is alive or not. So for me, what really stuck out when I watched this play was really that aftermath of Henry agreeing to give up the succession of his throne and giving that to York instead of his son. And that is just like, it's kind of like, you're a king, you have one job. You have one job to name a successor. And that whole section where they have that confrontation about who's the king and him making that deal is really really moving to me. So that was what stuck out initially when I was going through this. And then just what terrible aftermath there is for his son and for his queen, and just what a terrible kind of cowardly decision that is to shirk. It's not his responsibility, but it is, what I mean is to kind of squander what he should have given to his issue for some temporary peace that is never going to stick. And it just seems to me like it's perceived as such a moral failing. And it's interesting, I don't want to give it away, but I've been working on another play which has to do with royalty and what it means to have the crown, to hold the crown. And so it's just really interesting to me. Of course, it's not something that's, very commonplace for us to think about these days, but it is really fascinating to me. So that's what mostly stuck out. And then the rest of it was trying to remember who's who and who's switching sides and which names mean who. So that took me a little while to get a handle on. Of course, people keep dying, so there are less people to keep track of. But also, we really see how strong Margaret is in comparison to Henry. She works up an army more than once. She takes revenge on York. She kind of delights in his demise, where Henry is sickened by it. So in many ways, it's almost like the slightest glimmers of Macbeth, where she's so disgusted at his lack of manly fortitude and decisiveness and strength, that she's the one who becomes that, and he's just weak, which is not good. So that's an interesting little dynamic that's there in this play. And I know the Wars of the Roses are so complicated. I mean, we have a couple time jumps. We have at least 15 years jumped just in this play. So I think it was like a 40 year war, this portion of it. So just imagine, being in England and never feeling like your monarchy was stable, and that has a direct effect on, who your allegiance is to, if someone wants to kill you or not. So it's pretty traumatizing. And as I was saying earlier, this would have really been on people's minds during Shakespeare's lifetime, because Queen Elizabeth ruled for like almost 50 years and never married, she didn't even name a successor. So people would have been really nervous about this and trying to figure out what was going to happen after her. So this is definitely something that I think would have been on the forefront of people's minds, contemporary viewers or listeners of this play. So it's not just a point of interest like it is now. It's something a real issue. And I think that's all I really have for this one. I'm interested now to go forward with Richard III and really study that one, because now having the background, and for me it was helpful to have the background that we've already looked at, Richard II and Henry IV, and we haven't looked at Henry V yet, but to have that background to kind of know about Bolingbroke and Richard II and then Henry IV and the Fifth, that transition. So to have that kind of line and have an idea of who those kings were and what happened was helpful, even though they're kind of mentioned in passing in this place. So we're really getting kind of the lineup of the monarchy going through, and we'll pick up, I left out Henry V and Richard III we'll do at some point, but those are some of the bigger plays. These are the lesser plays of these cycles. So when we get to those, we'll have the background on both of those from studying these plays, and be able to hopefully to dive in deeper to those which are more kind of seminal works of these history plays. So I'm really excited for that, and thank you so much for watching and for watching these plays. Like I said, I'm recommending the Hollow Crown version, which I'll link below. You can rent it or buy it on Amazon, BBC, widely available. If you do want to track down a stage version, there's always the Globe player, if you like those. And yeah, join me next month for month 12. So we crammed 3 plays into 2 months, and then month 12 we'll be doing a different change of pace. So thank you so much for watching. And thank you for studying, for watching, for reading Shakespeare. There's always something to get out of it. For me, even just one line or one theme makes it worth it. And then if I watch this in a month or a year or 5 years, I'll get something completely different out of it. It doesn't have to be all at once. It doesn't have to be everything. I don't get everything. I don't remember all the characters' names. So some of the plays we'll get to, I do know all of the characters' names and all of the speeches, and and I just have a different relationship to some of those plays. But there's always something to get out of each play, and I hope you feel that way too. So have a great month, and we'll see you next time. Bye.